Well, I'd like to welcome Megan Baxter to Paranormal Matters. Megan, would you like to say hello?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very delighted to be here.
Yes. So, when I first started the podcast, I was thinking, gotta do episodes on this, UFOs, all these things. Ghosts, of course. Haven't done one on ghosts. Also haven't done one on Bigfoot. But at the top of the list was tarot. And you're really the only person that I had in mind who could give this topic the depth of dimension that I think it really requires. Can you speak a bit about your knowledge on the subject?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things. I'm entirely self-taught for tarot. I've been got my first deck when I was 16, so over 30 years ago. And then probably for the last decade and a half, I've been sort of researching it more seriously. But I also have a PhD in history in areas that have nothing to do with tarot. But I think that, the thought patterns and the way you research, that doesn't change, right? So as I've gone on, as I finished my PhD and had time, I've been trying to do a lot of thinking about how we think and talk about tarot, ways in which I like to use it and how that differs from other people. I can get extremely opinionated about extremely niche things, which, I think everybody does when they get to know something well enough.
So I was telling Charles just before we began that you did an introductory tarot class here in Mystic Bookshop a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about the subject. And everything that I thought about the subject was like romantic, mystical, naive. And I took that class and it really helped reshape my thoughts on the subject. To the extent that I was thinking, I could be wrong about this still. It reminded me of almost like an analog internet of symbols, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It does, and it is. And I think that's, with that workshop, that's something I like to do because my approach to tarot is fairly down to earth and doesn't rely very much on the idea of divination as much as it is I think for me, a tool for self-exploration. But because these are symbols, because you said this is an internet of symbols, there's a richness there. And there's a way in which, particularly as it's become so popular, the way that different decks deal with cards can sort of let you think and interact with a lot of these ideas in new ways. And to me, that's just hugely exciting. And it's not that there aren't occult parts to it. It's that I think we mysticize the occult too much. It becomes like this secret esoteric language that's out there that you can't get to, that you can't have. And then sometimes it gets flattened, I think, a lot, so that people want an answer. They want there to be like one thing that this tarot card means, and that's it. It's always going to mean marriage. It's always going to mean next week. It's always going to mean blank. I see a lot of people online, they want to know what's the answer. And to me, that's actually, if that's all that tarot was, it'd be really boring, and I would never have spent 30 years with this, right? The fact that I do is because every time I go back to the cards, I can think of something new, and it enriches my thought both on the card and a part of my life and how we do tarot and how I approach the world. And because there's that richness, because there's that ambiguity and the reliance on metaphor as opposed to trying to be really, really specific, it's a much deeper and more interesting medium than anything that was just a simple, this is what it means, you're going to get married next week, someone's going to propose. Well, then that card's done. What are you going to use that again? Maybe again 30 years down the road if you find another, it's one, that would be a one and done use of a card, and that seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So eventually you have one card left, and it's the death card.
It's death card. You're going to get there eventually. Except that now, if it's not that, then you can go, what does death card mean here? And how does it relate to the situation? And where is it about how I'm transforming? Which it can be, and often is. Or it can be, how has death touched my life? Because it has, and it does, and I've lost significant people in my life. And so I find the death card really meaningful for working through how I approach grief. And then sometimes it's just this Nope, I've lost what I was going to say. Let me see if I get it back.
That's okay.
So, but it's grief. But then on another hand, it can also be about how we approach the idea of mortality, right? So it's not how did other people's death affect them? How does the fact that I know that I'm going to die someday, how is that reflected in that card and how does it come up? And because it's all of those, it's hugely more interesting and deeper and there's more to it. And again, I'd get so bored if this was really easy to do.
So it's something new every time.
Yeah, every time. I was just on Friday night, I was helping somebody online with a reading that they were confused about, and I came up with a new way of reading part of the Celtic Cross that I had never thought before and I am now in love with. Right? And the fact that I came up with that 30 years in, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to use this all the time when I use Celtic Cross, which is not my favorite spread anyway, but it's a really popular one. And I'm like, oh, but this makes sense for my reading of it. And I like it literally was just coming out of me as I was writing it. And I was like, okay, well, now I have a new way of reading this really popular spread that I have never heard anyone else use before, but it works for me. And so it's cool because that keeps happening. I just don't get bored, or haven't so far. Again, 30 years in, I'm not bored by this, so...
Well, okay, so for today, I had this idea, which I shared with you ahead of time.
Yep.
You had said two things just when you were speaking there. You had said, this is really down-to-earth approach. And you said you like different decks.
Love different decks.
Yeah, so I have a really cool deck that I wanted to talk about. And it's like the opposite of down-to-earth because it deals with UFOs.
But it has real people and it has real commentary on those people, which I think it is. It does have this down-to-earth. It has a point of view. I want decks with points of view.
Right? Yeah. And so here, I'm just going to show. It's the UFOlogy Tarot deck.
Yeah.
And I'm going to overlay the card. I'm going to edit it into the screen, and also focusing on different parts of the card.
Please, yeah.
And the card that I wanted to share with you is the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's one of my favorite cards. Really.
Is it really? It's one of your favorite cards. I'm going to give that to you, and while I give that to you, and perhaps you can think a bit about, what you see and so on. I'm just going to read what the authors of the UFOlogy deck write about the moon.
Yeah.
And the authors, really it was a team effort. So Greg Bishop, Susan Demeter, Miguel Romero, an artist from Mexico City, did the very elaborate and beautiful designs on this deck and put so much hard work into it. Joshua Cutchins and David Metcalf, who are also scholars on all things paranormal and occult in their own right, all contributed to this wonderful deck.
Yeah, so I love it because I find I get frustrated with the decks where they haven't put thought into what's there and why. And this deck, everything about it makes me go I might not know exactly what that means, but somebody's clearly thought through why this is here, and I love that.
Okay, so the moon, and again, viewers of this can look at the card. The moon is the card of illusions and deception. In the traditional tarot, it depicts a crescent moon superimposed over a full moon, suggesting that the current would do well to look for ways in which they may be holding false or misleading beliefs and to seek more clarity. We all come from a place of ignorance when beginning our study of UFOs, so we must remain on guard for irrelevant or just plain wrong or manufactured information regarding the subject. Since no ufological consensus exists regarding any singular authority or group, it falls on each individual to build their own understanding. This is represented by a neophyte enthusiast in the foreground. The neophyte drips with muck from the swamp of ignorance, eager to capture an image of the apparent miracle before him. The bluebird on his shoulder references more recent examples where ufology's history has been deliberately neglected. The object literally hanging in the sky is the infamous Gulf Breeze, Florida UFO incident, allegedly created out of foam plates and paper by witness, photographer, and possible hoaxer Ed Walters. The case's authenticity remains controversial. Behind the flying saucer, the moon appears eclipsed, signifying that not only is its light reflected, but the light of knowledge is further obscured by misconceptions and assumptions of all who see it. The standard tarot card also includes a wolf and a dog, representing the wild and civilized aspects of our psyche. The passions of both can be inflamed by misleading appearances. Canines are also recognized worldwide as an expression of the trickster archetype, and the two men who represent this theme certainly revealed in the humorous, seamy side of the mystery and the people it attracted. Holder, on the other end of the UFO string, is author, researcher, and gadfly James W. Moseley, who lived from 1931 to 2012, who, although deeply interested in the mystery, was not averse to tweaking the noses and egos of his colleagues and those he felt were either deluded, taking themselves too seriously, or both. Moseley famously concluded that the most interesting part of the phenomenon was not the UFOs themselves, but the circus-like atmosphere that has always surrounded the issue. Moseley edited and published a long-running newsletter that provided notices on the latest sightings, research, and rumors amongst the saucer-smitten. Titled Saucer Smear, its most popular section by far were the letters that researchers would often use to snipe at one another in the pre-internet era. Because of this urbane background and character, Moseley was chosen to represent the more domesticated half of the Moon's figures, holding his cool martini glass as any sophisticated creature might. He laughs as if to let us in on the joke. The figure opposite Moseley is his best friend, confidant, and literal partner in crime, Gray Barker, who lived from 1925 to 1984. Barker's interest was originally piqued by the famous 1952 Flatwoods Monster incident, which occurred near his hometown. Arguably his most famous book is 1956's They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which coined the term Men in Black, and became a staple of UFO lore. He also privately penned a poem entitled, quote, UFO is a bucket of shit, offering his take on the UFO community. Barker holds a mason jar, which is probably filled with moonshine whiskey. Barker published the Saucerian, a newsletter that chronicled current UFO news, rumors, and personalities in the mid to late 1950s. Moseley often drove the 400-mile stretch from New York City to Barker's home in Clarksburg, West Virginia, where they would proceed to get wildly drunk and sometimes pull pranks on any UFO personalities whom they thought were taking themselves too seriously. The two towers in the background are filing cabinets filled with incidents and cases which the two men investigated and chronicled. Both friends wear boots and waiter pants to suggest their sophisticated attitude towards the subject, which protected them from the sludge and scandal and ill repute as they navigated the marshy terrain of ufology. So that's the write-up of the Moon card in the UFOlogy Tarot deck. Now, what do you think?
I mean, I love it. I love all of it, and I really love. One of the things I'm finding most interesting is one of the things I love about the Moon card. Like I said, it is one of my favorite cards, and it's one that I find, there's a real split in how people interpret it, right? Whether it's trickery and being wrong, or whether or not it's sort of knowledge you get at it in an oblique way. Like what becomes visible by reflected light that you can't see in the harsh glare of the sun. Like the sun is very specific and it's intense, and it washes out fine details. Whereas the moon is reflected light. And I think in this case, and I think there was a little bit in that write-up that sort of mentioned it, it lets us see so much more of the environment of what's going on. It reminds us that in this case, like these people who are in the ufology community, like they're real people, right? Like this isn't just, it's not like there's just this magazine that's put out by someone and nobody really knows who it is. Of course we know who it is. It's, it's these guys. But knowing that allows us to see where some of the tension comes in and how and why it was framed. It lets us see ufology as a story, as one that was and continues to be framed by individuals, and it comes from their own personalities, from their own life experiences. And to me, that's sort of what the moon can bring out, right? Where the sunlight might wash that out. It's about whether it's true or not. Whereas this is much more about what does it matter whether it's true or not? And we can debate that question all along, but what else might we discover if that's not the question we're asking? So I'm going to tell you, maybe a digression, you might want to cut it, but so there's part of my background is in history of religion. And there's a school that I really love called the study of lived religion. Robert Orsi is an American scholar. He sort of developed this, and he has... What I love about it is that it sort of says that whether something is right or wrong doesn't actually matter that much. Whether it's sacred or profane, objectively, it doesn't matter that much. It's how we construct these narratives that say that it's sacred or profane. And what does that tell us about the tensions that exist in a society, in a group of people, when these two ideas are in conflict with each other? And I think that's very true about ufology as well, because some of it can very much be a true believer thing. And so what are the tensions that come up when you have the neophyte in the front who just wants to take a picture and says, this is it, we're done. When you have these people in the back who clearly are having a little fun with this and using what they're doing to sort of poke fun at other people and are recognizing it as a community. And then you just sort of see what, within those tensions, what does that tell us about who they are, about how society saw ufology, how ufology saw itself, how individuals, like how there was infighting, right? As soon as you get into any number of group of people, there's infighting. And you may not see that from the outside. It looks monolithic, but of course it's not, right? So you have all of that kind of, because it's the softer reflected light of the moon, you can pull that out, whereas the sun is just, is this right or not? Is this sacred or profane? Is this, who's correct? And that's almost never the most interesting question.
Absolutely. And, I think there's quite a bit going on in the card, and just, as I'm reading, I don't want to stop myself and say, hey, moonshine. It might not actually just be alcohol. It could be literal moonshine.
Yeah.
Shining down on something, but you really have to wonder, well, what is it shining down on? Especially if you're looking over a vista. You can't make out details necessarily with moonshine. Yeah. And also the neophyte with the bluebird on the shoulder. I wonder if that references a former social media platform, right?
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, absolutely. Right, we have Twitter there, scaring everything in the background. Yeah, and the fact that like moonshine is both an alcohol, it's also a way of seeing. It distorts perception to some degree, but it might also allow you to have different realizations. Again, if we're deciding right or wrong as a precise measure is not what's most interesting in this situation. But then moonshine is also, like, it's used as a word for trickery itself, right? Like this, like the substance is also. And so you get all of that in this card. And I love that it's an eclipsed moon. I think that's really interesting. I really haven't seen that in many tarot decks. That's that sort of idea. They're right. It is mostly a crescent moon over a full moon, sometimes just a full moon. But the idea that it's eclipsed as well is that liminal moment, right? Like it's such a brief moment in time that it feels like they're saying something there as well about, or at least what it brings up for me is sort of the passage of time in the study of tarot, but also the study of ufology, that this is, again, it's not ahistorical, it's time-bound. It comes out of the exact moment that it's in. You and I have talked before about sort of the Cold War and what that does to how people see UFOs and how they conceptualize UFOs, and so you get all of that, and what people are doing for trickery. Again, because you and I talked about the fact my dad made a UFO in the year of the centennial in Canada and put it up, and he wasn't really trying to trick anybody. It was fairly obviously a prank, not a hoax, I think. He was a teenager, but also that it's that moment in time, that it was done to prank my maternal grandparents who lived like just down the road from him. It's
not to mention he was arrested and
charged with mischief for doing this, and then let off because the judge's wife didn't get to see it and wanted to see it, and the judge gave them permission, let them off if they put it up again. Right? Which tells you something about the 60s. It tells you something about the fact my dad was white and could get away with crap like this, right? Like there's all of this stuff that gets wrapped up in it that we can sort of play with because we have it all. And one thing I don't think they mention is that there's all these sinkholes in the terrain around them, right? And so there's that, like the two guys in the hip waders clearly sort of know where they are, but there's so many ways to fall and get lost.
That's a neophyte would
absolutely
at one point fall into, and how many deep fakes do we have to see posted on social media, on Reddit before it's like, okay, maybe truth and fiction or fact and fiction isn't the best way, the only way to look at this. But what's this middle ground?
Exactly, and of course, like, I'm interested if any of these can be said to be true. Like, I found that hugely interesting. But I think I always just go to, like, well, why are we looking at it that way? And why are we so invested in that? Whether this one specific moment in time, whether that was true, and what the fact that people are obsessed with that, what that can tell us. And the moon really focuses that. Again, I love the filing cabinets as the two towers, right? They're just packed full of opposing viewpoints. And I can sort of imagine what's in them. I worked at the archives at the university here at one point, and I remember going through somebody's papers, just doing a very rough catalog where there was a cranks folder, right? And I just remember reading these letters that were way the hell out there about ideas about what was going on, and you know, if this was a completely reputable medical establishment in this case, having this large file of cranks, like, I can just imagine what the UFO crank file looks like. Right?
It's amazing because it's I don't know much about crank files and UFOs, except there have been some, I guess, found files. You know, if somebody, there was a case in Florida, and there was a fairly dedicated subreddit community focused on, I think it was called Alien Puma Space Train, and it was amazing.
I'm sorry, say that again, because that's awesome.
Now, Alien Puma Space Train, where this Second World War vet, I believe he was from Denmark, and moved to Florida, created this archive focused on these visions that he was having and these UFO sightings that he was having. And it's just brilliant to look at. Now, imagine you're walking by a dumpster,
okay,
and you see this.
Yeah.
No context.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. So, yeah, like, what do people make of I guess, the deep waters of belief and perception?
Yeah. And if they were publishing a magazine, like, I can just imagine, you know, the letters they published and then the ones that they just sort of, you look at and go, like, what's even too weird to put into the Saucerian, right? Because I bet that stuff was part of what they got. It's like the slush pile of any magazine, right?
Absolutely.
Like, you just get everything sent to you. And then you become the funnel. You're the conduit through who other people are receiving information, right? So there's a way in which these guys on the moon card are the funnel.
And not just the funnel, but the authority.
Yeah.
They become instant authorities.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I am wondering how much the authority of the journalist is now being replaced with the authority of the military experiencer.
Yeah.
So
that's true. Yeah. Recently.
Yeah. So if you look at Congress, for instance, the congressional hearings with David Grush, Fravor, and I'm going to blank on the last name. I'll post it.
Yeah. I can't remember it either. So,
but there, and I'm not saying for better, for worse, or for right or wrong. These are people who are trusted, right?
Yeah.
And they have these very rich stories about things that they themselves have witnessed. So, I'm wondering if through, I guess, the complete blasting of the journalist through the internet and social media, we're actually looking to authority figures in the military who are in some ways filling this void.
Yeah, and to look at it through sort of a tarot lens, what does it mean that at this point they're the ones who get to say which is the sun knowledge and which is the moon knowledge, which is the stuff that we can trust, that this is the blinding harsh light of the sun, incontrovertible for whatever definition we're using for that, and what is the information that is shadowy and that we shouldn't be paying attention to. And again, that it sort of, it posits that there's sort of one right answer, and that the only thing that's interesting is right and wrong.
Absolutely. No, I'm so happy that I chose this card.
It's a great one, and I love that dude coming out of the water. He's like a swamp monster, right? Like, he's just like coming out of the water with his camera with one flashpoint in time, right? He's going to take a picture,
or maybe he's sinking in,
or maybe he's absolutely. but there's sort of that one moment in time to that compared to these, like, you know, the history that's in these filing cabinets. I also really, the hip waders are such a nice touch because they're really interesting because they say, you know, protects them from the muck of everything going on, but also looks a little bit pretentious, right? And just a little bit silly. That you're in the middle of this, but you're not actually affected by it.
Yeah,
you're actually putting your whole life in UFOs, but you're not like those other UFO.
and definitely people. Holding a martini glass.
Yeah, holding a martini glass. and the rope to the UFO there. And the sunglasses, right? The sunglasses at night in front of an eclipse, which both plays into the idea of the Men in Black, which, you know, of course, is coming from one of the two, I think they said. Yeah, but also just the idea there's not a lot more that he needs to see. And there's this just interesting tension here between mediating knowledge and yet sort of pushing it away in that one character.
Absolutely.
In a really interesting way. Yeah.
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 I'm glad that we chatted about this, Megan.
It's a great card. So it's a really cool deck, and I really like it.
Yes. So the developers of the deck put, like, each card is a very complex story. And the thing I like about the deck is, at least from my beginner's reading of this, it really looks at, you know, from Cold War to now, right?
Yeah.
Which is when we find ourselves in this time of, what was it you said, like a new religious, or like maybe that's what this is becoming, right?
Yeah, an orthodoxy at any rate, right? Whether or not it's religious, there's an orthodoxy that's sort of arising.
Yeah, and so to have, you know, these 22 cards that sort of say, hey, look, you know, there's this. I can only wonder what the other 50
Please do the minors. Well, personal plea, I would get this deck in a second if the minors were.
So, like, what would the minors say?
Right? Well, and that's, I mean, if the majors are the big life questions, who are we, why are we here, what is our place in the universe, which I think the cards in this do really well. I mean, the minors are always the nitty-gritty, the day-to-day, and I think, you know, for somebody who really knew the ufology community, I think you could do, like, you know, what is the Seven of Pentacles is about patience and waiting for things to come to fruition. What does that look like?
Oh my
gosh.
God.
In the ufology community.
Oh, disclosure.
Right? Like, where you're just sitting there and you're like, is it yet? Are you going to get it yet? Where is it coming from? And you know, what's the Three of Swords? What's heartbreak look like in the ufology community? You know, what does boredom look like? The Four of Cups, right? What is just being just a little bit over it, right? Like, I feel like those are all there, and I think you could do some really fun stuff with it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Megan.
Yeah.
I think this was a great conversation, and definitely, like, I wanted to also, you know, throw some element of surprise at you because I knew you could handle it. Although I did tell you just on the way here, hey, you know, I want to chat about the moon.
I had a half-hour notice of what card we were talking about. So, this was great fun. I'm anytime. If you want to talk about tarot, I'm around.
Oh, well, there's 71 other cards we can do episodes on.
77, 78 total.
Oh, there you go. You see, that's how little I know.
There you go.
Thanks again, Megan.
Thanks, Rick.